Hi. Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Mom Project's Masterclass, Stepping Out of Your Comfort Zone. My name is Elizabeth Shackelford, and today we are here with L'Oreal Thompson Payton.
Yeah,
Welcome!
thank you.
That you're here. L'Oreal is an award-winning journalist, motivational speaker, blogger, mom, and author of Stop Waiting for Perfect. She's penned what she calls a pocket-sized pep talk, and trust me, it is. Today, we are going to talk about trusting in your own greatness, as well as motherhood, career ambitions, and everything in between. And a little bit about L'Oreal. L'Oreal's professional writing is often inspired by her own personal experiences of trying to navigate the world as an ambitious Black millennial woman who was raised to believe that she could outwork all obstacles, but who has come to learn over time that success is not always guaranteed, even if you follow all of the rules. Her personal essays, feature stories, and celebrity interviews have been published in esteemed media outlets such as Bustle, Essence, Self, Shondaland, People, Publishers Weekly, and Well and Good. Her writing, speaking engagements, and wellness facilitation work pull from her personal struggles with issues such as self-doubt, imposter syndrome, infertility, and postpartum depression to encourage and inspire other Black women to see, trust, and believe in the beauty of who they are as enough, even as they strive to become more than that. When she's not busy writing, she can usually be found reading on her yoga mat or riding her Peloton. L'Oreal lives just outside of Chicago with her very patient husband and her brilliant daughter, whose laugh lights up her world. That was the sweetest part. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Yeah.
Okay, we're just going to dive right in because we have so much to talk about. Okay, so you have accomplished so much. You've worked in media, and then you became a director of comms at a nonprofit, then going freelance, and you wrote a book.
Yeah.
As we're getting started, give us an overview of your career journey and where you got to where you are today.
Definitely. It's been such a roller coaster, I feel like. And I think actually the best kind of visual representation of that is back in 2013. I read, like many of us did, Sheryl Sandberg's Lean In. And in it, she talked about the jungle gym. And so especially in journalism and media, you want to climb the masthead. That was my goal. I wanted to be editor-in-chief of a teen magazine because when I was growing up, I didn't see myself represented in those pages, right? Like it's before Beyonce was Beyonce. She was still in Destiny's Child. Before Michelle was First Lady. Before Black Girl Magic was a hashtag and Black Lives Matter was a movement. And so that was and remains my why to this day in my writing and what I do and why I do it. And I had a very clear linear path of this is the way that it's supposed to go because that's how it is. You start off as the reporter or the editorial assistant, and you slowly but surely climb that masthead. It's very much a ladder, and you want to make it to the top. And when I read that part in Lean In, where she talks about viewing your career as more of a jungle gym and how, you can move side to side, kind of that like more lateral, and it doesn't always have to be an upward movement, that gave me permission to kind of explore what else is out there. And I mean, truth be told, I really hit some serious burnout back in 2015. I believe it was, I remember vividly the day that Michael Brown was murdered, and I had to hop online, write this story. And it just became like, I became desensitized to the news and everything that was happening because it kept on happening. It's still happening, right? It's a different city, it's a different name, but it's the same, these senseless acts of violence. And so it was before I knew about therapy, before wellness, before self-care, and had built out my self-care toolkit in that regard. So I was like, this isn't why I got into journalism. I want to make a difference. I want to help young girls. And I pivoted to a nonprofit that did exactly that, looking at that kind of jungle gym framework. And pivoted later on as well. I realized, as we entered the pandemic, that I really missed journalism. I missed being the one writing the story. I didn't want to just pitch the story. And I had always done freelancing on the side. I always had a blog. I started a newsletter back in 2017. And I think it was a culmination of, combination of the pandemic. And then actually when Toni Morrison died, that I was like, girl, what are you doing with your life? Like you want to write, you were meant to be a writer. You were born to be a writer. That is your like mission and purpose on this planet. So like get back to it, even if it isn't super glamorous, even if it doesn't mean, making as much money as you are now. Cause I think sometimes people hear nonprofit, and my mom at least was like, oh, no profit and you're not making money. And I was like, actually, I'm making more doing this than I ever was in journalism. But giving myself that permission to pivot and to change my mind and to explore different things. Cause for so long I had this idea and this vision of what success looked like. And it was a lot tied up in that perfect ideal, that dream job, this is what I set out to do 5, 10, 20 years ago. And so that's the path that I have to stay on. And the book is a lot about giving people that permission to change their minds, to pivot, to explore what else is out there.
Well, and on that topic, we kind of touched on this, I know that the pivot inspired this book, but you've always wanted to be a published author. So how did you come to that time where you're like, okay, now is the time I'm going to write this book? Because I know a lot of other things were going on in your life too.
Yes. So many things all the time, all at once. And I mean, going back to Toni, though, I think about her. I mean, she literally is like a literary ancestor for me. And in her death, I think, because there was so much that I had tied up in titles, right? Like I want to be an editor, and she was a book editor. And, now we know her most famously as an author, as a writer. And that also kind of gave me this permission, like that's enough. And there is a quote that she had where she talked about, if there's a book that you want to read and it hasn't been written yet, you have to write it. And I really took that to heart. I was like, well, if Toni's telling me to do it, then I got to do it, right? Like, who am I to disappoint the legendary Toni Morrison? And I'd always had this idea of writing a book. I had the idea first in 2015. I think the working title then was like the Millennial Manual, right? I had, while I was supposed to be working, I was in the bathroom at my day job, and
No way.
Exactly. And then I abandoned that Google Doc because the perfection got to me, the imposter syndrome got to me, because I was like, well, who am I to write a book, right? Like, I don't have enough experience, I don't have enough followers. There are all of these reasons that I was telling myself that I'm not good enough, you can't do this. And so literally, like, the last time I opened that doc was in October of 2015. And then fast forward to 2017, I buy a book proposal course from Jensen Sarah, You Are a Badass, and started to write the proposal, started querying agents in 2018, got met with a lot of rejection, because there were agents who were like, this is a great idea. I like your voice, and I think this book is needed, but come back when you have 20,000 followers. And I think at the time I had like 6,000 or 8,000 across all platforms. And so that was very discouraging, right? And I mean, it's very much a reality of how publishing as a whole, and especially nonfiction, is if you're not a celebrity, public figure, influencer or whatever, it can be really hard to break out. Even though I had all of these credentials, all of these bylines, like a huge portfolio, it was still a matter of, followers and just kind of like building out that brand. So that's what I did. I started my newsletter and got more active on social media, and just kept, putting words on the page until I did sign with an agent. And it's interesting because the original premise of the book was about overcoming imposter syndrome, which now I feel like, I don't know that that's something you overcome once and then you're done. Like, at least I've figured out in my life, like, as long as I continue to grow and level up and challenge myself and do new things, I'm always going to be confronted with that imposter syndrome. But then we kind of expanded it to include perfectionism and self-doubt. They were all very closely related, because we had to change the title. It was originally Trust Your Dopeness, but that was like owned by some major global conglomerate, and I don't have major global conglomerate lawsuit money. So we pivoted to Stop Waiting for Perfect, which is actually pulled from a line in the newsletter that I was writing about writing the book. So very meta. But essentially, like, there's no such thing as a perfect first draft. I had attempted to write a perfect first draft because of that pressure I felt as a Black woman author. Like, I want to make sure I'm representing my people well, that other Black women authors will get a chance to publish their books. And that's just a lot of pressure. And it's, kind of, I talk about in the book too, that twice as good, half as much, that a lot of Black women in particular feel, because we've been conditioned to believe that that's the only way to, and it has been proven, like historically, that's the way to get ahead in the world. But it also comes at a great cost of our mental health, of our physical health. And I just decided, fairly recently, honestly, that wasn't worth it to me.
No, and one of my favorite parts, well, I have a lot of favorite parts, but I also liked when you listed out all of your rejections, and you literally have a list. I feel like it's on, I think it's on like page 122 for anyone following along. But I mean, I think it was such a concrete example of like, these are all of these things that have happened to me or things that I've been rejected from, being yet here I am still writing this book, or here I am still going after my dream. So I think it was a really tangible way. And because in our heads, I think we're always like, no, I can't do that because of X, Y, and Z. But it's nice to know that other people go through all of these same feelings too. And your exercise of writing it out was really helpful for me and encouraged me to do the same.
Yeah.
And on that topic of perfectionism, you do talk about in the book about how you kept your blue Peloton streak up for, I don't know, like how many days?
685 days. Not that anyone's counting, right? Like,
well, no, yes, but that is incredible. So kudos to you. And near the end of the book, you said that writing this book at the same time as becoming a mom has been a masterclass in letting go of perfection. Talk to us more about your views on perfectionism after becoming a mom.
That it doesn't exist, right? Perfection in parenting, I said earlier, perfect first draft doesn't exist. Perfect parenting does not exist. And yet I tried. And I opened the book with the Peloton story and losing that streak because it happened about a month after our daughter was born. So to set the scene, it's like January 2020, and my bike is being delivered because I was obsessed. I worked for a CEO who was obsessed with Peloton. I was drinking the juice. We live in Chicago. It gets dark at 4:00 in the fall and winter. I wanted something that was easy to do and keep up with my workout routine. And it made sense. And I had good intentions to start. And as I also write in the book, like the gamification of a lot of these apps, it is not just Peloton, right? People with sitting watching, if you have your Duolingo streak that's going on, even the Bible app has it, which I'm like, this doesn't make sense. But for the perfectionists like me, the people who got the gold stars growing up, who got the straight A's and the perfect attendance awards, right? Like these are our gold stars. These are our adult gold stars. And the intention started off great. And especially going into what we didn't know was going to be this global pandemic. And then for us personally, me and my husband, the start of a very arduous IVF journey. We had multiple failed cycles, like Peloton and the bike and the streak was the thing that I could control in a world where everything around me was like literally falling apart. So then fast forward to a month after our daughter was born, because to set the scene, I was also like, this is how obsessed I was, right? I was doing a meditation in the app on the way to the hospital the morning of our C-section. Like, that's not normal behavior. That's not healthy behavior. And then when I could walk around in the hospital halls and I was keeping it up and just everything to like keep this streak, because in my mind, like that proved that I was a good mom. I'm a good wife, good daughter, sister, friend, etc. All these things, because look at me, I'm doing it all and doing it well. And I laugh now because like it was a month after, I think like her first month appointment or something like that. And everything else that was going on, the clock struck 12:01 and I realized I hadn't logged into for the day, that the streak was gone. I cried real tears that I then later had to unpack in therapy, because it's like, why am I so obsessed with this? Like, this doesn't mean anything. It's not an indicator of who I am and what kind of person I am. And thankfully through therapy and some of that inner work, realize, okay, you're still worthy without this streak. You are still a good person without this streak. And so it gave me permission. Like that was, I think, kind of honestly the first time that I was confronted head on with this notion of, perfection doesn't exist. It doesn't mean anything. It is not this litmus test or indicator of how good of a person that you are. Life happens. And the sooner I was able to accept that, I used to be a very punctual person as well, like my parents, like doesn't go back to like the twice as good, half as much, because my dad would instill in me and my sister, to be early is to be on time, to be late, or to be on time is to be late is unacceptable, because again, that notion of, especially as Black people in America, you want to confront the stereotypes. You don't want to fall into that trap. And so that was instilled in me, this, again, idea of perfection. And having a baby, like, they're on their own timeline. Like we were late to her 2-year appointment last week and had to reschedule. And a year ago, that would have broken me, because it's like a good mom is not late to doctor's appointments. A good mom does this, a good mom does X. And thanks to therapy, I saw actually that same day, Big Little Feelings on Instagram had like a newsletter, and the mantra was, I did my best, I can let the rest go. And I have held on to that so hard because it's like, you know what? Like, and one night we were traveling back from Ohio, 6-hour road trip. She had Culver's for a late lunch. And by the time we got home, it was like, there aren't any groceries here. So here's, some Greek yogurt for dinner. And she survived. She's fine. She's still healthy and thriving and living. And it's just like letting go of this idea, which is hard, right? Because social media will, show the perfect moms with their kids and the Instagram perfect clothes. And why is everything brown and beige and like depressed? That's another story. But I had to realize and give myself permission, like, I don't have to be a perfect mom. I am a good mom. I know that for a fact. And I am the mom that Violet needs.
100%.
That. Exactly.
And that's something you have to tell yourself. And I think for perfectionists, and I would put myself in that camp. I think why postpartum anxiety was so prevalent for me, it was because I was so used to controlling everything and I was so type A. And so then you come to realize that everything's out of my control. So, and I think I empathize so much with that Peloton streak, because when one thing goes awry, it like everything else tumbles. And it just like, I couldn't control anything because that baby was in control and I didn't, it was just that part was really hard for me. And I think that's where my anxiety manifests too. Cause I was like, trying to control everything else, but it's impossible and you can't do it all.
No, and you can't do it all alone, and nor were we designed to. Like, there is a scene in the book that I write about as well that was just so vivid to me, because it was just like, that was a breaking point, right? Like, you normally, I nurse the baby, my husband puts her down for bed, but he was at a networking event that evening. And then in my head, I'm like, it's okay. I got this. I'm a mom. I can do it. And then like Morgan Freeman narrated my life was like, she would soon learn that she would not be able to do it. And every time I tried to put her in the crib, she got back up. I would put her down and she was like, no. And he came home, whatever many hours later, to find both of us crying, me and the baby, and took her. I just kind of went and like lay down in the bed and was texting one of my mom friends. I was like, Dory, I can't do this. Like, I don't think I'm cut out for this mom life. And she was like, A, it's too late. B, yes, you are. And like really helped talk me off the ledge in terms of like that anxiety and depression. And later that evening, I went onto therapy for Black girls and found a different therapist, because I had a good relationship with my previous one, but I knew in this season, I needed something different. I needed, for me, a therapist, a Black woman who specialized in postpartum depression and anxiety. Because I think that's the other thing I thought too, like, oh, she's a year old now, I should be over this. I should be past the postpartum depression. And like, it comes in waves, right?
It manifests in different ways.
Yeah. And postpartum is forever. Like, there is no cutoff time. And found someone who, local, takes my insurance. Yes. And then also the next day on Instagram, I was just being very candid about like how this is hard. We don't have family nearby. We've created a village, with our friends and neighbors and that sort of thing. But I was also kind of distraught because I saw this other mom, right, who had 2 girls, and her husband was away on a business trip for like 2 weeks, and she remodeled their home off and like all this stuff that I was just like, and I couldn't survive 2 hours. So I felt like a failure. I felt like a bad mom. And I was venting about that on Instagram. And immediately, like, 2 of my friends were like, pick a date, any date. Like, I'm going to come watch the baby. You and Jeff had a date night. My other friend was like, do you need me to come over? And, and I was like, yes. Cause I was so in my head too, like, a perfect mom doesn't need help. She does it on her own, but that's not reality. Like, we need the help, and we shouldn't be ashamed to ask for it. Like, again, we weren't designed to do this on our own. And it really, people say it takes a village to raise a kid, but I'm a firm believer that it takes a village to raise the mom as well.
You need all of that. You need all of that support. I'm like, I think all of us, we just go back to the year mark, and I'm feeling like all the same feelings. They're like bubbling up. But no, I agree with that. And if you're not following Big Little Feelings to make you feel better about all things mom, parent life, go follow Big Little Feelings. But the other thing that resonated for me in the book was early on, you talk about the 30-year power outage, wherein a girl's confidence dims, sometimes for decades. So talk to us more about that. And, the other thing is, what would you say to the women that are still going through this?
Yeah, I first read about it in a Teen Vogue article, actually, I think, and was just like, oh my gosh, like, that has been some of my experience. I went to an all-girl Catholic high school, so I think like my outage was delayed a little bit because there is something to say about that single sex education where I was like, oh, I feel good. I feel
Yeah.
confident. I'm empowered because I don't have to worry about like, what do I look like in front of these boys and everything. Like now, granted, it has its own issues, but that's a different,
Yeah.
different story for a different day. But this idea, and I see it in my own daughter right now. She's just 2, but still like confident, fearless, literally no sense of fear,
Yes.
just like jumping off of everything. And in my friend's daughter, my friend Dory, and I put in the book as well, because at the time I was writing it, I think she was around 5 or so. And it was, I don't know, one of those pandemic calls. We were just like FaceTiming because it's like, we need to
Yeah.
see someone other than the people in our house. And I was asking her, like, oh, well, like, talk to me. She was very much into the Olympics, I think, at the time, and gymnastics. And so was talking about she wants to be the first girl president and an Olympic gold medalist gymnast. And I'm trying to remember what the third thing was that she wanted to be, because there was 3. And now I'm blanking and I feel terrible, but it'll come back to me
It'll
eventually.
come back to you. It'll come back to you and you'll be
Yeah.
like, oh yeah, she wanted to be.
Right. Yeah. But there was like these 3 things. And it reminded me of when I was little and I wanted to be Janet Jackson's backup dancer, an astronaut, and a doctor, like all 3 in that order. And I believe that I could, right? Like 6-year-old me believed that that was a thing that I could do. And you see it in classrooms in elementary school. Girls are putting up their hands, they're answering the questions, they're not afraid to ask questions, they're bold, they're fearless, they're out there. And then like around the time puberty happens, high school, and like the peer pressure and like all of these things, and you want to fit in with your friends, and you tend to start to dim your light. And what happens, the person who wrote about the power outage talks about and says so eloquently, is that outage kind of continues from high school into college and then into the workplace as well. Like we're hesitant to say something in a meeting, or we'll just go along with what everyone else is doing to kind of like get along and get ahead. And we dim our light, we play it small because we don't want to make other people uncomfortable. A lot of times, I know in my own experience, I can definitely attest to that. And sometimes what happens, like you said, people are still in that. Eventually, for a variety of reasons, some book you read, a workshop you attended, a retreat, or whatever, you may start to get out of that outage and start to, own your space and own the light and really stand in your shine. But for those who are still kind of stuck, like, and I encourage you to start small, like speaking up at the nail salon if they don't get your manicure right, or if the barista makes your drink wrong. Like it seems, and we laugh because that seems like so minuscule, right? Like in the grand scheme of things. But if you learn to speak up for yourself in those small moments, then it gets easier and you practice it and you can work yourself up to speaking, up during the board meeting or in the, conference or during the presentation, whatever that is, because it's a muscle. Courage is a muscle. Confidence is a muscle. And the more we use it, the easier it gets. You have to work it out like any other muscle. So those kind of small moments where you see opportunity to stand up for yourself, and then something that I think about a lot, and my therapist has helped me with as well. She's like, what would you want Violet to do in that situation? And then she's like, well, you have to do it. Like, I have to model that for her. And that way, like, she is the best accountability buddy I've ever had, because she's watching, like, right. Even at 2, she's mimicking my behavior. She's looking at what I'm doing. How am I treating myself? How am I standing up for myself? And that kind of serves as her roadmap to how she can do it in her life as well. And so it's important for me, knowing that she's watching, that I need to model that even at times where I'm afraid myself, right? And I feel that discomfort, to feel it, to acknowledge it, to own it, and decide I'm going to move forward regardless.
There's just a lot to unpack there, but I think because when I read this, I could like see it in my mind where my mind dimmed. And I think really, truly, it kind of starts to shine when I had a daughter. And it was the same thing, is you have to realize and emulate, like, what do I want? Like, I don't want Fiona to hear me talking about myself. I think, I don't want her to see there's so many things about that it really, that was a real poignant moment for me. And so, thank you for sharing that, because I think too, it's like those small steps. And I laughed when you talked about nail salon, because I know exactly what you're talking about.
Yeah.
I do that all the time. And my husband's always like, you never speak up for yourself. And I'm like, because I just think there's just been times where I haven't, because so it was it rang true to me. And Thank you for sharing all that insight. I think it does also ring true for a lot of other people. Um, and then I guess kind of you talked about social media a lot, but another part that really resonated with me with jealousy, you know, and
Mm.
how we experience jealousy with friends and in the workplace and on social media. And so let's dive into, you know, where is that truly coming from and how can we take steps to combat that?
Yeah, I don't think that there's a such thing as bad feelings. Our feelings are valid. And I think kind of the behavior and what we do with it is kind of what determines or like, that matters going forward. And there have been, I mean, so many times that I felt jealous. One, I'm a Scorpio, and I feel like that's kind of like low key, just our love language, right? Like that's how we are and operate in the world.
I'm like highly jealous. I'm a highly jealous person.
Yes, yes. And for so
Yeah.
long, that's been like touted as a bad thing. And what I think, again, thanks to therapy, I've kind of learned is like, this is information for me. And I look at the jealousy and what is it pointing to? I think of, and I write in Stop Waiting for Perfect as well. And it's very full circle because my Chicago book launch was at this bookstore where I attended. Like Lovey was there, Samantha Irby, these two writers who I
Yeah.
admire and are badasses all around. And they were Chicago bloggers turned authors. So it gave me this hope that, like, okay, I can do it too. But instead of feeling inspired by it, and this was also the impetus for me starting therapy because the jealousy was starting to consume me. And not even of a like, I want what they have. It was, I'm not good enough to even get to that stage. Like, I will never be good enough to be an author. I'm not talented enough to do what they're doing. And then it became this really self-critical nature. My inner critic was being very loud. And in that very first therapy session is when she was saying like, well, I feel like, you're not being kind to yourself, which I was like, what do you mean? Like, I'm a big sister. I used to be a cheerleader, right? Like pep talks are kind of my jam. That's what I do. And I took, she directed me to Dr. Kristen Nev's self-compassion website where I took the assessment and failed for the first time in my life, a quiz. It was like, I got 2.5 out of 5, I think, in terms of how kind I was to myself. And it was like the first time that I realized, like, okay, our earlier point, we give these pep talks and we're super encouraging to everyone else but ourselves.
Mhm.
And the jealousy is information, right? It's usually points to this is something that I also want and desire for myself that I don't have yet. And so then what can I do to take steps toward it? And one of the scenes that I write about being a native Marylander, I remember distinctly the Olympics where Michael Phelps and the Chatlaqua, I think was
Mhm.
swimmer from South Africa. And in
Mhm.
the picture, you see Michael's like locked in to the finish line and wins the race. I don't know by like whatever fraction of a second or something. Like math is not my strong suit. But in the same picture, the South African swimmer is looking over his shoulder, looking at Michael. And did that cost him the race? Who's to say? But it certainly didn't help, right? Like paying attention to what someone else is doing. And I had to, especially when it comes to social media envy, right? Because you have a front row seat to everyone's wins. Like I remembered Tuesdays, I would avoid Twitter because that's when everyone announced their that Publishers Weekly screenshot of their book deals. And I was just like, I'm so happy for you. And this is something I really want for myself. So I'm going to tune out. I'm going to give myself permission to, like not engage and to just kind of like avoid Twitter on Tuesdays. And also that kind of same mentality when we were going through our infertility struggle, right? Because
Yeah.
there's baby announcements galore and Mother's Day and like all these other things where I was just like, for the sake of my own sanity, I cannot
Mhm.
engage. I need to either mute this person, I need to unfollow in some cases. And I think it gets a bad rep though, right? Because we're supposed to be happy for everyone all the time. That's not real. That's not reality. We're human beings and we experience a breadth of emotions. And one of them includes jealousy. And that doesn't make you a bad person, right? Like to feel jealous of someone who has something that you want. It doesn't mean that you are this terrible friend or whatever. Like there are other ways to show up and be supportive that don't come at the expense of your mental health. And so it was finding those ways for me in both the case of, friends with babies and friends with books to protect my own peace, to, do some more meditation, some journaling, some yoga, to not put myself in those situations, but then also figuring out, okay, what is this telling me? And then keeping my eyes on my own paper, like going back to that Michael Phelps situation where it's like, okay,
Yeah.
this is this person's journey. That's their pregnancy journey. That's their book journey. That's not my story. And mine is still valid. It's still worthy. It is still needed and necessary in this world. And so just kind of like putting those guardrails up to stay focused on my why and what I'm doing. And that has helped push me through. Now, granted, the jealousy still happens. I'm not going to sit here and lie and pretend like I'm some super evolved person where I'm not subject to those feelings. But again, it's just acknowledging it's a feeling, and that doesn't mean, it doesn't have to mean more than just that, right? Like, and it's what you do with that information that matters.
Absolutely. And what you talked about, and you also talked about the feelings wheel, which
Yes.
we have a link and we're going to put it in the chat because I think that was a really eye-opening thing, of being like, there's a myriad of things I could be feeling in one day, and like really pinpointing why, and getting to the why will help me figure out what I can do to fix it.
Yeah.
And you also talked about gratitude and like your gratitude journal and writing it down morning and night, which I feel like my therapist has told me to do that. And I was like, I'll get to it. But I know it's helpful. It's just like, when you're a mom and you're like, there's just a lot of things on my plate. But it's even just thinking about it and being like, I have to just think about what is in my, what's in my garden, and what I, those little things that I can be grateful for.
Yeah.
And as a reminder to everyone watching, we do have time for a Q&A at the end. So pop any questions you may have for L'Oreal into the chat and we will get to them. And also, as a little midpoint break, if you are interested in getting your own copy of the book, we do have a promo code you can use. So we will pop the link into the chat as well, along with the promo code. It's the Mom Project, so it shouldn't be too hard to remember. But I would highly recommend it. I have so many things underlined and highlighted.
Oh,
you
yes.
won't regret it. Like, really, my husband was like, "What are you?" I was like, "I'm reading."
Right. And that's the goal. Like, I reread Big Magic every year by Elizabeth Gilbert, especially as a writer, as a creative. It is like my go-to. And that is my hope with this book as well, that people will return to it, that you'll revisit it, before the big moments in life, before the speaking engagement, before the job interview, before you're negotiating a raise or asking for a promotion, and that you will underline, that you will write in the margins, and then the like kind of question space and everything like that, and like almost like a workbook, and make it really more of this interactive kind of activity.
Well, and I wanted to pass it along. I was like, I had so many people that I wanted to read, but I was like, actually, I don't want to give it away because I need my own copy to go back to. Well, and okay, let's talk about, you do have a lot of like concrete job advice in there too. What I really loved was one of you gave the 10 criteria for finding a new job, and like the power of the pivot. You've pivoted so much, and some things that the thing that we talk about a lot here at the Mom Project is that career paths are not linear. And I know that you mentioned at the top about the jungle gym, but what advice would you give to those people navigating their own career pivots or rethinks, or any of that kind of stuff?
Yeah. The biggest one is not settling. And I think that's something as women we're conditioned to do, right? We should be so grateful. And even more so if you're, from a marginalized background, you should be so grateful to be in the room. You should be so grateful to have this job or that title. And if you dare ask for any more, then, you run the risk of becoming, a problem, right? Within an organization or whatever you are. And I had subscribed to that for so long in my career, right? I was just so happy to be in the room where it happens. I was so happy to be at this, at the table. And then what I realized is like, I'm settling for scraps, like, right? I deserve the whole shebang instead of just kind of like settling for, what they decide to give me. And that has been the motivating force, honestly, for a lot of the pivots, especially when I left the first nonprofit that I was at. There was, I'd done some research. I saw that in talking to friends as well who were at other nonprofits, that I was making about like 20, 30,000 less than some of them were. And the reason that they told me is like, but we're a nonprofit. And I was like, okay, let me interrupt that because I've done research. Yeah, time out. These other nonprofits are paying this amount, and advocated for change and for myself and for more money and all these things, and was constantly told no, 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 and decided to leave and find somewhere else. And then, I right as well, I love her so much, good friend and mentor, former editor Christina Tapper, had written this article for Pointer and talked about kind of the 3 W's when you're deciding whether you want to leave a job or not, especially leaving a job without another 9 to 5 lined up, which I've done quite a few times. Never thought I would be that person because, I was very much risk adverse in the earlier part of my career. And also then realizing as I got older that, it's not as risky as I had been led to believe.
Yes.
The real risk was staying where I was being overworked and underpaid and undervalued and underappreciated. And then also that taking a toll on my mental health and physical health. That was riskier in my opinion. But the 3 W's she mentioned, she talks about, doing the work, making the case, like I said before, with managers and the check-ins and the reviews and everything like that. Like, here is what I want. And this is why, laying out the case for them, having your receipts, all the examples, the evidence that shows that you are worthy, what you're doing, that, you've got this. And then doing the work while you wait was like the second one. And then, why am I blanking on all the third things in my examples today? This is really embarrassing. But it was work, wait, and walk. That was the last one.
I'm like, you'll get there.
Yeah. And then being prepared to walk. And I've done that recently. I left a full-time journalism job and I'm back to doing full-time freelance writing, but it was because I think that's sometimes too, right? They're like waiting to see, okay, like they're going to call you on your bluff, right? Like you're not actually going to, because where are you going to go? And it's like,
right.
I'm going to bet on myself. And I know that I have the skills, that I am capable, and that I deserve, this salary, I deserve this title. And if you aren't going to be able to provide that, then I'm going to go somewhere else, even if that means, like right now, working for myself. And so that those 3 W's I think about a lot and return to in my own, and I've had different 9 to 5s because it's like, you don't have to settle. You don't have to settle for the scraps. You don't have to be just, thankful for what you've got. And I know that's really hard in this economy, especially especially in media. I mean, there's just news this morning about them shutting down Jezebel. And I'm like, so angry with this industry. It's just, oh my gosh, like it breaks my heart. I'm like, I loving an industry that doesn't love you back is just really, really toxic. But yet, and still I write. So it's like, okay. But that's across industries though. I think the best advice is to not settle, to know your worth and be willing to walk away if you can. I know there's daycare is real, mortgage is real, healthcare expenses, like all of those things. So, saving as well as you can to have that kind of like FU fund, when you need to be able to walk away for the sake of your mental, physical health. Because that's my belief as well, that no job is worth the depression and anxiety that can come along with being overworked and underpaid and underappreciated as well.
Well, and I think it takes you a long time in your career, a long time, but like 10 years in, I finally figured it out. I finally realized like, this isn't worth it. And maybe it was at the intersection of me becoming a parent and then realizing like the world is bigger and my job isn't the only thing that I need to hang on to. But I think at the Mom Project too, we talk a lot about, what are the options? Is it a career pause? Is it contingent work? Is it freelance work? And we just announced our new platform, Self-Made, which allows women to build a career on their terms. And it gives you the tools you need to set it up. It gives you the proposals and contracts and invoice tools, because there's so many things about going freelance that you don't know how to do.
Yeah.
It's like the scariness of it. And it's taking that leap. And what does that look like? And so embracing that fear is just kudos to you for kind of writing this out and spelling it out in the handbook of like ways that I can continue to go back to it and continue to like rethink about what I feel is rejection or what I am scared of doing, and just taking the leap, because you truly don't know. And I think your advice of do not settle.
Don't settle. And I mean, the real wake up call for me recently, because it was one thing to write this book, and we talked too before, like giving all this advice, but then not following it ourselves.
Yes.
This has held me accountable as well. Like the book tour and all the conversations. But I just remember distinctly this summer, because I was like really trying to go after this promotion. I feel like the bar kept getting moved, like the goalpost was constantly being
Mhm.
moved. And I was obsessed, like going back to the Peloton street, kind of this like, all or nothing sort of mentality. And my therapist checked me and she was like, what I'm starting to hear, like I'm starting to notice some depressive symptoms, fatigue, irritability. I noticed, I didn't have the energy really to play with my daughter when she got home from daycare because I was so tired. And granted, it was like, a 9 to 5, preparing for a book launch, raising a toddler, like all of these things
Yeah.
happening at once, but it's like something's got to give. And so taking the, pivot now to freelancing, is this going to be forever? I don't know. And I'm also not as, committed to 5-year plans as I used to be,
Yes.
right?
Yeah,
It's like,
for
let
sure.
me see where life takes me if the right opportunity comes along. But in this season, right now, this is what's working best for me, and giving myself permission to explore that, I think has been really changing, like life changing as well.
And giving yourself to explore that without making yourself feel bad for wanting to downshift in whatever way that looks like.
Mhm.
Downshifting from a 9 to 5 to freelance is not a downshift, but I think we all have to consider, what that looks like. And in a lot of the master classes that I've talked to these women, I think a lot of them say like when you have children, you have to reevaluate what that looks like. And
Mhm.
especially in those early years when it's like full throttle,
All
you
hands
are
on
in
deck.
it.
Yeah.
You can't, something might have to change slightly, but that
Mhm.
doesn't mean you can't ever go back to climbing
Right.
that ladder when you're ready to climb the ladder. But for right now, you may just want to stay on that rung and
Yeah,
figure out what looks best for you.
exactly.
Okay, so I am seeing that we have tons of questions. So I think let's just dive right in because
Yes.
I want you to give like this wonderful sage advice to our community. Okay. Oh, perfect. Okay. Mariana asks, how
Oh.
did you find time to write your book? I'm a writer, and between taking care of my baby, writing for my clients, and life, it's hard to do all three.
I feel that on a spiritual level. And I can, and I'm like tearing up a little bit because it brings me right back to that moment where I was in the thick of it and just really stressed, trying to keep all of these balls in the air. And it was really taking a toll. And what I will say, and what I write in there as well, is like I had this vision, right, of how it was going to look. I'd be in the coffee shop in, with my latte and my lo-fi hip hop playing and writing very much like Carrie Bradshaw, right? Like I was, gonna do the thing. And that's not what it looked like. It happened maybe 3 times that I actually like wrote in a coffee shop, and especially the first draft because it was like it was right after our daughter was born. So it was just like, okay, how are you going to do this? And finding those, especially for the parents, I feel like those moments, those stolen moments. So a lot of the book, I'm going to be honest with you, was written in the notes app in the nursery while I was breastfeeding my daughter with one hand and typing on my phone in the other at like 2, 3, 4 o'clock in the
Yeah.
morning, right? Because I'm awake. This was better than shopping on Target and Amazon like I did
It's better
so
than
many times.
scrolling because you're just in the depths of like you're just scrolling. Instagram's feeding you everything you need to see as a
All
new
the
mom.
things, all the things. And so it was, that's how I got, and it was just like those different margins after she went to bed, on naps on the weekend. What I would do differently though, now I feel like, and I had asked one of my mom friends how she did it, 'cause she is also a full-time reporter, author, has 2 kids. And she was like, I hired babysitter, even if I was home, so that I would have time to go write. And I know that's like, a luxury as well, a privilege to be able to pay for childcare to do it. But, if you have friends who are willing to step in, family, partner, whoever it is asking for help, there's that word again. Help is very important, especially for, trying to do this really audacious project while also raising a family. And so I would, hindsight 2020, kind of take more of that dedicated time away, like maybe booking a hotel room for the weekend, have a half day in the coffee shop on the weekend, but just like let it be known and talk to your family about what you need, how much time it's going to take, and making that and there's sacrifice that comes along with it, well, like saying no to the brunch dates and other things and stuff like that to prioritize this project. But you have to make the time, you have to ask for it, you have to take it. It's not just gonna like suddenly appear and come up and like fit it into your life. Something else will have to give. So I hope that helps. You have to be a little selfish to to do this.
Well, and you talk too, you talk about I got it syndrome,
Hmm. Oh,
which
I suffer.
just explain what that is, because I think we
Yeah.
all are like, no, we can do it all, but we can't. So
My another mentor in my head, because I have a ton of those, but Elaine Fluker, who's host of the Supportive Sexy podcast, and her book that actually talks about like I got it syndrome, and it's this notion, this theory that a lot of women, a lot of Black women, in particular women of color, especially because it's like I have to do this on my own. I can't ask for help because it's seen as a weakness. If I ask for help, no one's going to do it the way that I'm going to do it. And you're probably right. They're not going to do it the way that you're going to do it. So you have to let go of that idea of perfection, that it's going
yeah,
to be done the way that you want the dishes out of the dishwasher, or do you need them to be loaded the way that you want them to? No, the end result, we just want the clean dishes. So does it matter how they get in there?
yeah.
No, ultimately, because there's more important things to worry about. So you have to relinquish some of that control in order to, do what it is that you're trying to do. Will someone watch your kids the same way that you would? No. But did they keep them alive? Did they feed them? Okay, great. Now go to the coffee shop, the hotel room, or wherever it is that you need to focus on your writing project, and trust that everything is going to be taken care of without you. Like, you don't have to be this super sacrificing super mom and like martyr and put everyone else's needs and everything else before your own. Like, you deserve that time as well. You can ask for it, and then you ultimately have to take it.
You got to take the time.
Mm-hmm.
Ugh. Okay, we do have another question. As a mother and a woman of color, what was the hardest generational story that you've had to dismantle and rewrite?
So many of them. And what's been one of the most beautiful things in the book tour is seeing like Black women buy the book for themselves, but also their daughters and their moms and their aunties, and having this kind of generational ripple effect. And the just one of the things about like pushing through, because I think for so long that has been my default. That's what I saw my mom do and her mom before her, right? This is generational, the trope of the strong Black woman that does a lot of damage to us as well. And I remember vividly, we were hiking in Hawaii last Thanksgiving, actually, right after Thanksgiving. And it's a hike I'd done before, no problem. Much different with a 20-some pound toddler strapped to your back. And so we're hiking, we're making it. I can see the top, we're at the next to last summit. And my mind is saying like, push through, push through, push through, right? Because that's my default. That's what I've always done. But I've also, again, shout out to therapy, have learned through a lot of that inner work that that's also a sign that I need to press pause. So my brain is saying push through, but really my body is saying, girl, sit down. So that's what I did. I turned around. We went back, to where the benches were. The rest of my family was waiting. I gave the baby to my sister, drank some water, caught my breath. And then I turned to her and I said, Mommy's really tired right now. And it's important that we listen to and honor our bodies and our boundaries. Now, granted, she was one. I don't know how much of that she retained.
No,
And
yeah, no,
it was important for me that she
Mhm.
see me rest and that she see me take a break and not push through despite all these other things, because I think that that is something that has been passed down generation to generation. And I want to disrupt that cycle of that, like, as a Black woman, especially, you deserve rest. You deserve to take a break. You deserve to sit down. You do not have to save the world. And showing her that, because again, going back to what my therapist said, like, what would you want Violet to do in a situation? I would want her to care for herself and her body and recognize and honor her boundaries and what her body is trying to tell her. So then I need to do that. And it seems very simple in theory, but I know that's the legacy I want to leave behind. I want to give her permission to be a soft Black girl in the world that is constantly trying to make us, like so tough and so strong. Like, no, you can drop the cape. You don't need to be strong all the time. There is strength in that vulnerability. It is not a weakness. And so you can take a break, you can rest, and you can allow yourself to heal.
Yeah, I have it. That is perfect. Well, and as you know, if anyone else watching has more questions, but the other thing I thought of when you're talking about allowing yourself to heal is those reflection questions that you had at the end of every chapter. And like sometimes they would be uncomfortable for me, which I'm sure is the point.
Mm-hmm.
But how did you kind of get to that point where you knew you needed to ask those at the end to help the reader kind of nail in what you're talking about?
Yeah, I'm a very practical person, like, or very like straightforward. And so I wanted to have those questions because I'm a journaler. I've been journaling since I was like in middle school. And so just having those prompts, and I will free write, but it's sometimes helpful to have these questions to think on because we so often don't take the time to reflect, right? Like life is so busy, momming is so busy, like all these things, there's a million things on our to-do list. And so to take that time to get quiet with ourselves and get still, because I think that's when we can also become reconnected with that inner voice, right? We have the inner critic and they can be very loud, but then there's also the other voice, like the one that's saying, you know, you can do this, you got this. Why don't we try this? What would happen if? What would we do if we knew we couldn't fail? You know, like, and so sometimes because the world is very loud, literally and figuratively, you know, there's a lot going on, and that is an understatement. There's so many headlines and social media and all of these distractions and the notifications and everything else. And so I hope that these reflection questions will give you some time to pause, to get still, and then to listen to what that inner voice is trying to say. Because so often it gets drowned out and we become disconnected with it and we don't hear it or we don't recognize it. And so this is to help you start to recognize that inner voice of what you want, what you really, really want. You know, shout out to Spice Girls and some steps to make that happen.
Yeah, it's like sitting in the silence. And I think that's sometimes why meditation's so hard is because it's just like
Mhm. Just you and your thoughts.
your thoughts.
Listen, I went on for my 30th birthday, I took a solo trip. I was inspired by one of my friends who does a solo birthday trip every year. And I was thinking like 30 is a good, I'm going to, you know,
Mhm.
start this chapter, and went to the Four Seasons in Santa Fe. And I cried the whole first day that I was there because I didn't, and I intentionally left my laptop at home because so often that's my go-to. Like I will drown myself in work in order to avoid feeling. And I didn't have that with me. And so it was me, my thoughts, and my journal and my tears. But it was like the first time in a very long time that I was sitting in the silence with myself and my thoughts and my feelings. And it just all came literally pouring out. And it was so cathartic and so just like what I needed, that I would like 12 out of 10 recommend you could take the solo trip. One of my friends calls it like momcation, you know, but just like taking that time for yourself to get quiet and sit with yourself and get in tune with your body and your needs.
Well, and I
It's
think
very
that's probably
important.
where you're gonna figure out a lot of things that, you know, what that looks like in your career, what that looks like
Mhm.
in your personal life. And also it probably allows you to be kind to yourself because I think in the day to day, you're so busy running from, you know, A to B that you just, you know, I
You're on
think
autopilot.
you're
Yeah.
on autopilot and drowning it out and drowning out the noise will really help you kind of define what that looks like and what success looks like, if
Mhm.
that's whatever that looks like to you.
Yeah.
Okay, well, I'm seeing so many things. Oh, and I see something in the comment about the Rise program. So if no one's if you are thinking about a pivot or kind of thinking about upskilling in the process, please go check out Rise. It's our 501c3 dedicated to upskilling and scholarships for women and women of color. So we'll pop a link in the chat. And I'm just looking through. I'm trying to see if there's any other questions. L'Oreal, any final thoughts as we kind of close out our conversation today? I'm so glad we got a chance to talk.
Yeah, no, thank you so much for having me. And I know I was like fangirling and all the promo posts about how much I love the Mom Project even before becoming a mom, because the work that you all doing is so necessary. And now being a mom myself and knowing, you know, all that we're confronted with on a day-to-day basis, like it is nothing short of a miracle that we're all here, that we made it at this space and time. And so I just, you know, for everyone listening, watching the recording, whatever, like just, you know, extend that grace to yourself. We are so giving of it to other people, to our children, to our colleagues, to our partners, to our families, and you are deserving of that same grace that you give others, like you deserve for yourself. And you know, it's just, it's hard out here for working moms, which I don't love that title because I'm like, parenting is a job whether you get paid
Totally.
for it or not. So let's just also name that. And so it's helpful to be in community with other people who get it, who understand. And so I'm so grateful that you all exist. I'm so grateful that you asked me to be part of this. And for everyone who is watching and attending, just thank you for showing up for yourself, really.
Well, and you wrote an article that really resonated with our community for Fortune Well, that talked about why being a working parent is good for your kids. And I know
Mhm.
our community loved it when we posted it, so we're going to put it in the chat again because it is a must read. And it was just all the things of it kind of, I think so many of us feel the guilt of, one way or the other. And when I read
Mhm.
this, I was like, oh.
Yeah.
Okay, so I saw one more question come through.
Yeah.
If we have 5 more minutes, so I will put this up. But any tips for a mom on a career break, wanting to start working again?
Yeah. I mean, I have a friend who's going through this right now, and I just keep telling her, I'm like, don't settle. I know I said that earlier, but I think because you have to look at like what am I giving up and what is it that I want to do? And it can be so easy because of everything that's going on to just accept whatever is handed to you or like the first thing that comes along. But you really need to again get quiet and get still and really meditate on what it is that you want and need out of your next opportunity and going out and finding that, being proactive about it, talking to people, doing informational interviews, getting a gist of a company before even going to before applying. Honestly, see if there's people you can connect with on LinkedIn who work there. Look out for the companies that have good reviews and also have really great benefits and also like about that life, right? For lack of a better word, I think of Mom Project, I think of Bobby, I think of there's a couple other ones that are very much like intentional about Baby List. I think is another one that comes to mind immediately, but they are like making strides in better benefits, better working environments for working parents. And so doing some research to figure out there's lists, all over the place of what those companies are, seeing if there's roles that fit you, your experience and what you're looking for there. But I would start kind of that reverse engineering of looking like where is the place that I'm going to feel most supported as a working mom, and then seeing who works there that you may know. If you don't know anybody, making some introductions on LinkedIn, but just doing that research into and getting very intentional. And it might mean passing on some
Mhm,
opportunities,
mhm.
but that's okay. Like, be confident that the right role is out there. It will find you, you will find it, and it
Yes,
will be worth it when you do.
yes, have faith in the plan.
Mhm.
You'll find the right role, and know that we have a lot of resources over on the library, which is our blog, which has tons of things about coming back from a career break and interview skills and prep. And then we also have a ton of master classes over on YouTube and here on LinkedIn that kind of outline um, any way that you can come back from a career break, whether it's navigating getting your resume up to date or how to talk about your career break in interviews. So I would definitely suggest checking those out too. As a reminder, you can get the book. We will pop the link again in the chat and use code Mom Project for 30% off. This session is recorded, so it will be available afterwards. So you can come back and watch it anytime. L'Oreal, it was such a pleasure to speak to you today.
Oh, thank
True
you.
pleasure. Highlight of my week. Thank
Oh, thanks.
you.
Thank you so much I just appreciate it, admire what you all do, and so happy to be in partnership together.
Likewise, we admire what you do. And for all those of you watching today, I hope you will join us next week on November 14th for our event all about self-made, getting started as a freelancer. If you're thinking about making this next step, definitely attend this event. We'll have a demo of the platform. We'll hear from the experts who built Self-Made, and we'll also talk about how best to market yourself as a freelancer. We will pop the link into the chat. Again, thank you so much for joining us today. Thank you all for being part of the Mom Project community. We are rooting for you every step of the way. We'll see you next time.
Thank you.
Bye.